They say that for a lawyer, loyalty is a currency. For 40 years, I invested all of my capital into one man, Arthur Vance. I wasn't just his personal lawyer, I was his confidant, his strategist, his shadow. I built the legal scaffolding for the Vance empire, a sprawling conglomerate of manufacturing, real estate, and logistics, all from the ground up. Arthur was a titan, a man forged in the crucible of post-war ambition, and he saw the world in terms of foundations and legacies. I was the man who drew the blueprints for both. He trusted me with everything, his business, his family, his secrets, the most important of which he never even told his own son. When he passed, the empire didn't just lose its founder, it lost its soul, and I lost a friend who was closer to me than any brother. His grandson, Sterling, inherited the crown. But Sterling was cut from a different cloth, a cheaper, flashier fabric that looked good under showroom lights but tore at the first sign of stress. He had an MBA from a school that taught arrogance as a core curriculum, and saw Arthur's life's work not as a legacy to be stewarded, but as a piggy bank to be smashed open. His first official act, before the wreaths had even wilted on Arthur's grave, was to call me into the office I had occupied for 4 decades. The office Arthur had designed for me himself, with its dark mahogany and the faint, pleasant scent of old books and leather. Sterling was perched on the edge of the great oak desk, not sitting behind it. He couldn't command that kind of authority. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, but he wore it like a costume. He swirled a glass of something amber, the ice clinking nervously. He didn't offer me a seat. He told me, "Theodore, the company is moving in a new direction, a more dynamic, aggressive direction. We appreciate your years of service, of course, a legacy of loyalty, but we need a legal team with more teeth." He said the word teeth as if he'd just learned it in a corporate seminar. It hung in the air, a cheap plastic thing. My 40 years of service, of navigating hostile boardrooms, of dismantling corporate raiders before they even knew they were in a fight, of structuring deals that were still paying dividends decades later, all of it was being dismissed as toothless. He slid a folder across the polished surface of the desk, a generous severance, he called it, a golden parachute, as if I were some disposable executive to be bought off. I looked at his face, the smug, unearned confidence in his eyes, and I felt nothing but a profound, chilling calm, the kind of calm that comes when you see the final piece of a puzzle you've been staring at for years click into place. He didn't know, he couldn't know. He saw me as a relic, a fossil from his grandfather's era. He had no idea that I wasn't just a part of the foundation. I was the fail-safe. I was the final will and testament of a man who knew his own bloodline better than anyone. Arthur had seen the rot in his lineage, the reckless ambition in his grandson's eyes even when Sterling was just a boy. And years ago, on a quiet, rain-swept afternoon in this very office, he and I had built a ghost in the machine, a quiet legal construct, an irrevocable trust, so deeply embedded in the corporate charter that only a handful of people had ever known of its existence, a trust with a single devastating trigger. And I, Theodore, the toothless old lawyer, was its sole trustee. Sterling was about to start a war, using his grandfather's empire as his war chest. He thought he was leveraging assets. He was actually lighting a fuse that led directly back to him, and at the end of it wasn't a victory. It was a void. He thought he was firing me. He was actually arming me. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a spark of something that wasn't just loyalty. It was anticipation. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a boss who completely underestimated you. It's a special kind of feeling, isn't it? Don't forget to like and subscribe, because you're going to want to hear how this story ends. The walk from that office to the elevator was the longest of my life. Every footstep on the marble floor echoed with the finality of it all. 40 years. I'd started as a junior associate, fresh out of law school, full of ideals and legal theory. Arthur Vance, then in his prime, had taken a chance on me. He said he saw a builder's mind in me, not just a lawyer's. He didn't want someone to just read contracts, he wanted someone to architect them. I passed by portraits of the company's milestones, groundbreaking ceremonies for factories I'd secured the land for, launch events for products whose patents I had meticulously filed. My life's work was hanging on these walls. Now I was a visitor walking through my own museum. A few of the older staff, the ones who had been here for decades with me, saw me walking with the box of personal effects security had packed for me. They had the decency to look away, their faces a mixture of pity and fear. They knew what this meant. The old guard was out. The age of spectacle and spray-on confidence was in. When I got home, the house was quiet. My wife Eleanor was out at her book club. It was for the best. I didn't want her to see me like this, not right away. I didn't go to the living room. I went to my study, the one place that was truly mine. It was a smaller, humbler version of my office at the firm, but it was filled with the same spirit. Books on legal history, corporate law, philosophy. A photograph of a younger me and a beaming Arthur Vance, standing on the unfinished framework of his first international headquarters. He had his arm slung around my shoulder, a dusty hard hat on his head, and he was laughing. The caption he'd written on the back read, "To Theo, the only man who knows where all the load-bearing walls are, my architect in all things." I sank into my worn leather chair, the one I'd had since our first child was born, and I finally let the mask of professional composure fall. It wasn't anger that hit me first. It was a wave of grief so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. It was the grief for Arthur, for the legacy he'd so desperately tried to protect. He hadn't just built a company, he'd built a community. He paid his people well, offered pensions that were unheard of, and treated the factory floor workers with the same respect he gave his board members. He used to say, "A company is a living thing, Theo. You feed it, you care for it, you give it a moral compass. If you only see it as a source of profit, you'll starve it to death." And here was his own grandson, ready to serve it up on a platter for a quick meal. My mind drifted back to the day the trust was born. It was about 15 years ago. Sterling was in his early 20s, already making a name for himself as a reckless playboy, crashing expensive cars and making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Arthur had called me into his office. The weather was foul that day, a cold November rain lashing against the windows, mirroring the storm in his mood. He looked older than his years, the weight of his grandson's indiscretions heavy on his shoulders. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He said, "Theo, my boy is a fool, a charming fool, but a fool nonetheless. My daughter, God rest her soul, she spoiled him rotten. And Sterling has the ambition of a conqueror, but the wisdom of a toddler. He will inherit all of this one day, and he will burn it to the ground for a moment's glory." I tried to reassure him, to tell him that Sterling would mature, that responsibility would temper him. Arthur just shook his head, a sad, knowing smile on his face. "Hope is not a strategy, my friend. We need a firewall, a dead man's switch. I want you to create a trust, an irrevocable one. I want the majority shares of Vance Holdings, the core of everything we've built, placed inside it." He laid out the terms with the precision of a military commander planning a campaign. He wanted the trust to be dormant, invisible, a sleeping giant. It would cede day-to-day control to the heir, allowing them to run the business, to profit from it, to feel the weight of the crown. But there had to be a line, a red line that, if crossed, would awaken the giant. "What's the most reckless thing a man like Sterling would do?" he asked me, his eyes sharp and focused. I thought for a moment. "He'll want to expand too fast," I said. "He'll want to make a name for himself, something bigger than you. A hostile takeover, something splashy that gets his name in the papers." "And how would he fund it?" Arthur pressed. "He'll leverage the company," I replied. "He'll use the core assets, the very heart of the empire, as collateral for a massive loan." Arthur slammed his fist on the desk, not in anger but in triumph. "That's it. That's our trigger. The moment, the very second. Any part of the foundational assets of Vance Holdings are pledged as collateral. The trust activates. It will transfer a controlling interest, 51% of the voting shares, to a charitable foundation we will create. He will be left holding the debt, and the company will be safe, forever dedicated to the causes we believe in." He wanted to protect his employees, to fund medical research, to build community centers. He wanted his legacy to be one of creation, not destruction. It was a work of legal art, a masterpiece of foresight. We spent months on it. I brought in a young, brilliant associate from my firm, a kid named David Chen. He was hungry, sharp as a tack, and utterly discreet. He idolized me, and I saw a younger version of myself in him. Together we wove the trust into the very DNA of the corporate structure. We buried it in subclauses and articles of incorporation, making it look like standard boilerplate language to the untrained eye. It was perfectly legal, ethically sound, and completely invisible unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. And Arthur made me the sole trustee. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a heavy, unshakable trust. "If the time comes, Theo, it will be on you to execute this. You will be the last line of defense for everything I've built. It's a heavy burden, I know, but there is no one else I would entrust with it." I gave him my word. It was a promise made between two old friends, a sacred pact to protect a life's work from the folly of the next generation. Now, sitting in my study, the weight of that promise felt heavier than ever. Sterling's generous severance package was an insult. The non-compete clause they'd included was laughably unenforceable for a man of my age and position, a clear sign that the aggressive new legal team was composed of hacks who relied on intimidation rather than sound legal practice. They probably thought a man in his late 60s would just take the money and fade away into a quiet retirement of golf and gardening. They misjudged me. They misjudged Arthur. They misjudged the power of a 40-year promise. The grief began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just about my wounded pride. It was about my duty to Arthur. It was about competence versus arrogance. It was about legacy versus ego. Eleanor came home a few hours later. She saw the box from my office on the hall table and the look on my face, and she knew instantly. She didn't say a word. She just came into the study, put her hand on my shoulder, and stood there with me in the quiet, supportive silence that only a lifetime of partnership can build. After a few minutes, she said softly, "What are you going to do, Theo?" I looked up at the picture of me and Arthur, at the memory of his booming laugh and his unshakable faith in me. "I'm going to do what he asked me to do," I said. "I'm going to keep my promise." The catalyst wasn't a call from a client or a competitor. It was the quiet strength of my wife's hand on my shoulder and the echo of a dead man's plea. The long game was afoot, and I was the only one who knew the rules. The first step in any complex operation is to review the schematics. For the next 2 days, I didn't answer the phone. I didn't check the news. I sealed myself in my study and re-immersed myself in the architecture of Arthur's final wish. I pulled the original trust document from my fireproof safe. It was in a heavy, leather-bound portfolio, the vellum pages thick and cool to the touch. The ink was a deep, rich black, the language dense and precise, a fortress of legalese we had constructed brick by brick. Every clause, every subsection was a carefully placed stone. I read it from beginning to end 3 times over. I wasn't just reading a legal document, I was reliving its creation. I remembered the long nights debating the exact phrasing of the trigger clause with Arthur. He was adamant it had to be airtight, with no room for a clever lawyer to wriggle through. The moment any part of the family business is used as collateral, not sold, not liquidated, but used as collateral. It was a subtle but crucial distinction. It targeted the specific act of hubris Arthur predicted, leveraging a stable, profitable entity to gamble on a risky venture. The beneficiary of the trust was the Vance Foundation for Community and Progress, a charitable entity we had set up at the same time. On paper, it was a modest foundation with a small endowment, enough to fund a few local scholarships and a wing at the city hospital. It was designed to be overlooked, a sentimental pet project of the old man. No one, not even the company's CFO, knew its true purpose. It was a sleeper agent waiting to be activated and handed the keys to a multi-billion-dollar empire. And as sole trustee, I held the codes. My authority was absolute and, most importantly, irrevocable. Arthur had seen to that. There was no board to overrule me, no family member who could challenge my position. In the event of the trigger, my duty was not to the shareholders, not to the board, and certainly not to Sterling. My sole fiduciary duty was to the trust itself and to the charitable mission Arthur had laid out. With the plan reaffirmed in my mind, my next step was to secure my flank. I needed an ally, not just for legal support, but for information. I thought immediately of David Chen. The brilliant young associate who had helped me draft the trust all those years ago was no longer a junior. A quick search confirmed what I suspected. David was now a partner at a prestigious downtown firm specializing in complex corporate litigation. He had a reputation for being a shark, but an ethical one. I knew he had never forgotten the mentorship I'd given him. He still sent me a Christmas card every year. I called his private line. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Vance?" "No," I said. "It's Theodore." A moment of surprised silence then. "Theo, is everything all right? I haven't heard from you in ages." "I'm fine, David, but I need to talk to you. In person. It's about an old project we worked on together. For Arthur Vance." I could almost hear the gears turning in his sharp mind. He knew instantly what I was talking about. Of course, he said, his voice dropping to a more serious, confidential tone. My office. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. No one will bother us. Walking into David's gleaming modern office felt like stepping into a different world. It was all glass and steel, a stark contrast to the old world mahogany I was used to. But David greeted me with the same respectful warmth he had as a young associate. He was older now, with a few flecks of gray at his temples, but his eyes had the same intense intelligence. He closed the door, activated a privacy screen on the glass wall, and gestured for me to take a seat. He didn't ask any questions. He just waited. I slid a single unsigned document across his desk. It was a summary of the trust's core mechanics, with all names redacted. I wanted to see if he remembered. He read it carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "The dead man's switch," he whispered, almost reverently. "I haven't thought about this in years. It was a work of art. Is this happening?" I nodded slowly. "Sterling fired me 2 days ago. He's going after a rival, a company called Aerodyne. It's a huge, risky play. He'll have to leverage everything to pull it off." David leaned back in his chair, a low whistle escaping his lips. "He has no idea, does he? He thinks it's just boilerplate. He probably had his new aggressive team look at the corporate charter and they missed it completely. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it." "I need you, David," I said. "Not as my lawyer. Not yet. I need a second set of eyes. I need to know that my interpretation of this is as ironclad as I believe it to be. And I need intelligence. You move in circles I no longer have access to. I need to know what the street is saying about Sterling's takeover bid. I need to know which banks he's talking to. I need to know the moment he signs the loan documents." David's smile vanished, replaced by a look of grim determination. "Consider it done, Theo. It would be my honor. Arthur Vance gave me my first real break because you recommended me. I owe you. And frankly, watching a punk like Sterling get what's coming to him is a form of public service." We spent the next 2 hours going over the trust document, line by line. David, with his fresh litigator's perspective, confirmed my assessment. It was untouchable. The language was too precise, the intent too clear. Any legal challenge Sterling could mount would be laughed out of court. As trustee, my actions were not just permitted, they were mandated by the terms of the trust. To not act would be a dereliction of my duty. My other key asset was less formal, but just as important: the network of relationships I had built over 40 years. Arthur had always said contracts are just paper, Theo. Relationships are steel. I started making a few quiet calls, not to anyone at Vance Holdings, but to people in the ecosystem around it. The heads of our largest suppliers, the managers of our biggest logistics partners, the old-school bankers who had worked with Arthur for decades. I didn't mention Sterling or the trust. I just told them I was retiring, that I wished them well, and that my time with the company had been a privilege. It was a farewell tour, but it was also a subtle activation of my network. Each one of them expressed shock and dismay. They all said the same thing, in one form or another. "Theo, you are the company. Without you and Arthur, it's just a name on a building." They pledged their personal loyalty to me, making it clear that their business relationships were based on the trust I had cultivated, not the letterhead on the invoices. I was laying silent groundwork. When the time came, the empire wouldn't just lose its head, it would lose its nervous system. Because the nervous system was loyal to me. This wasn't just a legal maneuver anymore. It was a full-scale strategic operation. I was no longer just Arthur's lawyer. I was his executor, his general. Sterling thought he was playing checkers. He was about to find out he was on a chessboard, and he was already in checkmate. He just hadn't realized it yet. The waiting was the hardest part. My life, which for 40 years had been a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and deadlines, was suddenly quiet. Too quiet. I spent my days reading, walking in the park, and trying to stay out of Eleanor's way as she tended to her garden. But my mind was anything but quiet. It was a war room, constantly running simulations, anticipating Sterling's moves. The silence from the company was deafening. No one from my old team called. I knew why. Sterling would have put the fear of God into them. Any contact with me would be seen as treason. The only link I had to the unfolding drama was David. He became my periscope, my eyes and ears on the inside of the financial world. He'd call me once a day, always from a secure line, with a progress report. His updates painted a picture of a young man drunk on power and spiraling into desperation. Sterling's initial attempts to secure funding for the Aerodyne takeover were failing. The more conservative old-school banks, the ones who had relationships with Arthur, had politely declined. They saw the move for what it was, a reckless, ego-driven gamble. David told me one of the senior bankers, an old friend of mine named George, had called the bid a vanity project wrapped in a suicide vest. Sterling, infuriated by the rejection, turned to a new breed of lender, aggressive, hungry investment banks that cared more about fees than long-term stability. They were willing to play ball, but their price was high. They wanted a premium interest rate, and they wanted ironclad collateral. According to David's sources, Sterling first tried to leverage Aerodyne's own assets post-acquisition, a standard move. But Aerodyne's board was smarter than he anticipated. They'd put in place a poison pill defense, making that impossible. Sterling was trapped. His ego was so deeply invested in this takeover that backing down was not an option. He would look weak, foolish. So he did exactly what Arthur had predicted all those years ago. He started offering up the crown jewels. David's call came on a Thursday afternoon. His voice was tense. "Theo, it's happening. Sterling's team has been in lockdown with financiers from a firm called Argentis Capital for the past 48 hours. They're a pack of wolves. My source on the inside says they've hammered out a deal. Argentis will provide the full $2 billion line of credit, but they're demanding full security against the core assets of Vance Holdings, the manufacturing plants, the primary real estate portfolio, the logistics network, everything. He's putting the entire empire on the table." My hand tightened on the receiver. "So this is it. When are they signing?" "The ceremony is tomorrow," David said. 10 a.m. at the Argentis headquarters. Sterling wants a big press conference afterward to announce the takeover. He wants to be on the cover of every business journal. I took a deep breath. The calm was back. The cold, clear certainty of purpose. "Thank you, David. You've done well. Is there anything you need from me?" he asked. "Just one thing," I said. "Get me a copy of the signed and executed loan agreement the second it's filed. The very second." That night I barely slept. It wasn't anxiety, it was the strange electric hum of a plan, decades in the making, finally coming to fruition. I felt like a watchmaker who had just finished assembling a fantastically complex timepiece and was now just waiting for the stroke of midnight to see if it would work as designed. The next morning I didn't watch the news. I didn't need to. I sat in my study, the leather-bound trust portfolio open on my desk. Beside it were 3 envelopes, sealed and addressed. One to the board of directors of Vance Holdings, one to the CEO of Argentis Capital, and one to the chairwoman of the Vance Foundation for Community and Progress, a retired judge and an old friend of Arthur's, who knew nothing of the bombshell she was about to receive. At exactly 10:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from David. It was a single file attached, a scanned PDF of the loan agreement. I opened it. There it was, page after page of dense financial jargon, but the crucial section was highlighted. Schedule B, the collateral, a list of every foundational asset of the Vance empire, and at the bottom, Sterling's arrogant, sprawling signature. The trigger had been pulled. The ghost in the machine was awake. My first move was silent, precise, and digital. I forwarded the executed loan agreement, along with a cover letter formally invoking my power as trustee and citing the specific clause in the corporate charter, to the 3 addresses. The letter was simple and direct. It stated that as of the moment of Sterling's signature, a controlling 51% stake in Vance Holdings had automatically and irrevocably transferred to the Vance Foundation. It informed the board that their fiduciary duty was now to a new majority shareholder. It informed Argentis Capital that the assets they believed they held as collateral were in fact controlled by a new entity, and that any attempt to seize them would be met with the full force of the law. I hit send. There was no fanfare, no triumphant music, just the quiet click of a mouse, and then I waited. The panic did not take long to begin. David called me an hour later, his voice a mixture of awe and suppressed laughter. "It's chaos, Theo. Absolute chaos." Sterling was in the middle of his grand press conference, bragging about his bold new vision when his CFO got the email. My source said she went pale, stood up, and walked right out of the room without a word. A minute later, Sterling's phone started vibrating off the hook. He tried to ignore it, but then his lead lawyer from the new aggressive team ran onto the stage and whispered something in his ear. The look on Sterling's face, Theo, it was priceless. He just froze. The confident smirk melted off him like wax. He started stammering, mumbled something about a technical issue, and then practically sprinted off the stage. The reporters are going insane. No one knows what's happening. At the same time, the CEO of Argentus Capital got my email. They're in full-blown panic mode. They've just extended a $2 billion line of credit against assets that the borrower may no longer control. Their legal team is having a collective meltdown. They've put an immediate freeze on the credit line, but the ink is already dry on the agreement. Sterling is on the hook for the commitment, but he can't access the funds. He's trapped. I listened calmly, picturing the scene. The glass towers, the expensive suits, the symphony of chaos I had orchestrated with a single email. Sterling wanted to be a conqueror. He had charged onto the battlefield, sword held high, only to discover the ground beneath his feet was a trapdoor, and I had just pulled the lever. The silent takeover was complete. The empire was safe. Now the fallout would begin. The initial shockwave I'd sent through the corporate world was only the beginning. The real power shift began not with a bang, but with a quiet, dignified exodus. The first to go was Eleanor Vance, no relation, but a woman whose loyalty to the company's true values was as solid as her namesake's. She was the chief financial officer, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who Arthur had personally headhunted years ago. Sterling had kept her on because he needed her expertise, but he'd treated her with the same condescending disdain he'd shown me, dismissing her cautious financial models as lacking vision. An hour after the news broke internally, my personal phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. A calm, familiar voice said, "He always said you were the architect, Theo. I just saw the blueprints. It's Eleanor. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I've just tendered my resignation. The letter is on Sterling's desk. I've also frozen all non-essential expenditures and alerted our auditors. He's hemorrhaging money on the advisory fees for this disastrous takeover bid alone. He's cornered. What are your instructions, Theo?" She didn't call me Mr. Theodore, she called me Theo. She didn't ask what was happening, she stated her allegiance. In that moment I knew the soul of the company wasn't entirely lost. "There are no instructions, Eleanor," I said. "Only my deepest gratitude. Enjoy a well-deserved rest. Something tells me the Vance Foundation will have need of a world-class CFO very soon if you'd be interested." I could hear the smile in her voice. "I'll send you my resume." Her departure was the first crack in the dam. She was widely respected in the industry. Her walking out was a signal. It told the world that the problem wasn't a technical glitch, it was a fundamental crisis of leadership. Within 48 hours, 3 other senior vice presidents, all veterans from Arthur's era, followed suit. The head of logistics, the director of research and development, and the VP of human resources. They didn't make a fuss. They just cleaned out their desks and left. Competence isn't cheap, and it's the first thing to walk out the door when it's not respected. The aggressive new team Sterling had brought in was left scrambling to fill a sudden vacuum of institutional knowledge. They were a team of demolition experts who were suddenly being asked to build something, and they didn't have the first clue how. Then came the desperate counter-manipulation. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID read Sterling Vance. I let it ring for a moment, savoring the sound. Then I answered, my voice perfectly level. "Theodore." His voice was a ragged, high-pitched mess, a stark contrast to the smug confidence of our last meeting. "What have you done?" he shrieked. "What in the hell have you done, you old fossil? I'm going to sue you into the ground. I'll ruin you. You've committed treason against this company." I let him vent, his threats washing over me like a summer rain. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke. "I have done nothing, Sterling. I have simply executed the legally binding instructions of a trust, as is my fiduciary duty. The trust your grandfather created to protect his legacy from the exact brand of reckless ambition you have just displayed. You did this to yourself. You were so busy looking for teeth that you forgot to check for a spine." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with dawning horror. He was finally beginning to understand. The threats stopped. The pleading began. "Theo, Mr. Theodore, look, we can fix this. There has to be a way. Name your price. I'll double your old salary. Triple it. You can have your old office back. I'll make you a senior partner, give you a seat on the board. Just undo it, please." It was a pathetic display. He was offering me the very things he had taken away, as if my loyalty and my dignity were commodities to be bought and sold. He still didn't get it. "This was never about money or a title. It's irrevocable, Sterling," I said, the word landing with the finality of a gavel strike. "It cannot be undone. It was designed by your grandfather to be permanent. The Vance Foundation now controls the company. Your connection to it is severed. Except, of course, for the $2 billion personal guarantee you signed with Argentus Capital. That, I'm afraid, is all yours." I heard a sound on the other end, a choked guttural noise of pure despair. He hung up. The power shift was complete. He had tried to oust me, the quiet, unassuming lawyer, but in doing so he had activated a force he never knew existed. He had stripped the empire of its most valuable assets, not the factories or the real estate, but the decades of wisdom, loyalty, and competence that I and people like Eleanor represented. And now he was alone, surrounded by the ruins of his own making. A week later, I received a formal request for a meeting. It wasn't from Sterling, but from his lawyers, a different, more expensive set this time. The kind of somber-looking men who are hired when the battle is already lost and the only thing left to negotiate is the terms of surrender. They wanted to meet on neutral ground. We agreed on a conference room at David's firm. I walked in and saw Sterling sitting at the far end of a long, polished table. He looked like a ghost. The expensive suit was rumpled, his face was pale and drawn, and the arrogant fire in his eyes had been replaced by a hollow, beaten look. He was flanked by his legal team. I sat down alone at the opposite end of the table. David was present, but only as an observer. This was my confrontation to handle. Sterling's lead lawyer, a man with a weary expression, began. "Mr. Theodore, we are here to discuss a path forward." My client was unaware of the full ramifications of the trust structure. "We believe there may be grounds to challenge its execution based on undue influence." He was fishing, throwing legal jargon at the wall to see what might stick. I held up a hand and he fell silent. I looked past him directly at Sterling. "There is no path forward for you, Sterling. Not with this company. You are looking for a loophole that doesn't exist. Your grandfather and I spent a year making sure of that. This isn't a negotiation. This is a notification. You are out. The company, his life's work, is now in the hands of the Vance Foundation, which will be guided by the principles he set forth. It will continue to employ thousands of people. It will continue to innovate. It will continue to support the communities that helped it grow. The only thing that has been excised is you." Sterling finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why would he do this to me? He was my grandfather." I looked at him, and for the first time I felt a flicker of something akin to pity. "Because he loved you, Sterling. He loved you enough to know you. He knew your ambition was a wildfire, and he refused to let you burn down the forest for the momentary warmth of the flame. He didn't do this to you. He did this for the legacy that you were willing to sacrifice. He left you your personal inheritance, your money, your properties, a fortune by any measure. He only protected the one thing he knew you couldn't be trusted with, his life's work." I stood up. "My work here is done. The new board appointed by the Foundation will be in touch regarding the formal transition." I turned to leave. As I reached the door, Sterling called out, his voice cracking. "You enjoyed this, didn't you? All these years you were just waiting." I paused, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. I thought about it for a moment. "No, Sterling," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I didn't enjoy it. It breaks my heart that it was necessary. I was simply honoring a promise to a better man." And then I walked out, leaving him to the silence in the company of the expensive lawyers he had hired to clean up a mess of his own making. The new workplace reality had set in. The Foundation's board was installed the following week. Eleanor Vance was appointed interim CEO. David's firm was retained as official counsel. The aggressive legal team Sterling had hired was dismissed. The news of Sterling's personal financial ruin was a quiet footnote in the business pages a month later. Argentus Capital had called in his personal guarantee on the loan and he was forced into bankruptcy. The empire was secure. My promise was kept. My vindication wasn't in his ruin, but in the survival of Arthur's dream. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had been a conservator, a guardian. I had simply let arrogance run its natural self-destructive course. In the end, it was never about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional thing. This was something else entirely. It was the cold, clean, and satisfying click of a well-laid plan falling into place. It was about seeing a promise through to its conclusion, 40 years after it was made. Today I sit on the board of the Vance Foundation. It's an unpaid position, one I accepted without hesitation. From my new, much humbler office in the Foundation's headquarters, I help oversee the distribution of the profits from Arthur's empire. We've fully funded a new pediatric cancer research wing at the city hospital. We've established a trade school to give young people the skills they need for the modern manufacturing jobs at the Vance plants. We've revitalized parks in low-income neighborhoods. I see Arthur's legacy not just surviving, but thriving, growing in ways he only dreamed of. His name is on buildings that heal, that teach, that bring communities together. Sterling wanted his name on the cover of a magazine. Arthur's is carved in stone. My life is different now. It's quieter. The frantic pace of corporate law is gone, replaced by the more deliberate, more meaningful work of philanthropy. Eleanor and I travel more. I have time to read those philosophy books that gathered dust on my shelves for years. I finally have time to be the man I always wanted to be outside of my work. I reclaimed my own life, a life that had been so intertwined with the Vances that I had almost forgotten where it began and the company ended. I was more than a lawyer. I was a husband, a father, a friend, and I was a man who kept his word. So here's the moral of the story, the lesson I learned over a lifetime of service and one final definitive act. Aggression is not strength. Noise is not power. True strength lies in foresight, in integrity, in building things that last. True power is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're standing on a solid foundation of your own making. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. Sterling thought he could buy a new, more aggressive future, but he forgot that the past has a vote, legacy has a voice, and sometimes the quietest, most unassuming person in the room is the one holding the key to the entire structure. They might look like a fossil, a relic from a bygone era, but don't ever mistake loyalty for weakness or experience for obsolescence, because a lifetime of knowledge patiently applied can be the most aggressive force of all. I wanted to share this story with you all because I know so many of you have faced your own Sterlings. People who dismiss your experience, who value flash over substance, who believe they are entitled to a victory they haven't earned. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or cast aside, know this: your value is not determined by their opinion. It's determined by your competence, your integrity, and the foundations you have patiently built throughout your career. Let me know in the comments about a time you had to rely on your experience to overcome a challenge at work. Your stories matter. They are a testament to the fact that in the long run, it's the architects, not the demolition crews, who truly shape the world. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of vindication and hard-earned wisdom.